Hello everybody, it's Murray here and welcome back to my channel M Stuart Paintings. On today's easy acrylic painting tutorial, we're going to paint this gorgeous seascape. I'm going to teach you how to use colours to create perspective in your paintings, to push things far off into the distance, how to use darker colours to bring them forward closer to the viewer, how to use your darkest darks to bring things into the foreground and make them look like they're really close to the viewer, and then how to put highlights and shadows to create realism in your artwork so you can paint this gorgeous seascape in acrylic paints. So let's get into it. So for the tutorial, you're going to need the following colours. Don't worry if you don't have all of them, you can make them and I'll show you how. Titanium white, cad yellow, yellow ochre, cad orange, cad red, raw sienna, burnt sienna, chromium oxide green, turquoise, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, iris purple and raw umber. Now I've got an A4 canvas that I've drawn the horizon about halfway down. We're going to have 3 cliff tops and we're going to use 3 different tones to push the furthest one far back, the middle one a bit closer, and the last cliff and all these rocks with crashing waves very close to the viewer. We're going to have some water that we're going to make more shallow, and we're going to have some crashing waves and some shadow. So if you'd like to pause the video and copy down the outline, feel free to do so and we'll get started. So just like always, we always start at the back, we paint the sky and we work our way forward. So we're going to mix 2 types of blue. We're going to get lots and lots of white because we're going to make them nice and pastel. The first dollop of blue we're going to make is just white and some cerulean blue. You can add a little dot of cobalt blue and you should get a very pastel light blue. This is what we're going to use at the bottom of our sky. This is going to be our horizon color, and then we're going to get a second dollop of white, so lots of titanium white, and we're going to add more blue. We're going to add cerulean blue and cobalt blue in equal measure, so make it nice and dark, and then we're going to add a little bit of cad red. So just to make it more purple, look, you could add purple if you don't have cad red. So white, cerulean blue and cobalt blue, just a little bit less white than previously. We're going to make a darker shade. See how it's darker because it's got more cobalt blue in the mix. So we've got our 2 shades. What we're going to do, we're going to get a big brush, and at the bottom of our horizon we're going to use the lighter shade. Now I don't tend to paint in pencil. My brush was shredding today for some reason. These are new brushes and it was decided that its bristles were shredding. But I normally don't use pencils when I'm drawing an outline because, as you can see, it leaves horrible scruffy marks when you're painting. But don't worry, if you do get that at home, you can always paint over it. You can always dry your work with a hairdryer and go over them. But I just tend to normally use a darker canvas and use chalk just for that reason, because I don't like the sort of smudge. So we're going to go about 3/4 up into the sky, and we're going to just use the lighter of the 2 blues, so the one with more white in it. And we're going to go up to about 3/4 of the sky. There we go. And then the top part of our sky, we're going to use the darker shade of blue. And all we're going to do is use that to frame our composition, because we always darken up our corners. And the sky, no matter what the colour is, always lighter at the horizon than it is at the top. So just by combining the 2 colours, we can do that. We can even add a little bit of white, look, at the horizon, just to make it even lighter. Just so it looks like it's fading off into the distance. So by making your horizon lighter than the top, it just tricks the eye. Now, if you're like me and you have, look, bristles coming off or you have streaks, you can always dry your work. I'm just going to fast forward it because it's not very interesting. And just give it a second coat of paint. This will take any brush strokes out of your watery acrylics. And if you're like me and you've got a shredding brush, and you can just neaten everything up. So now we've done that, we've got this lovely blue that we've made, which is cobalt blue, cerulean blue and white, and either red or purple to get this darker blue. And we've got a lighter blue. What we can do, look, if I show you how to make it, it's white, cobalt blue, a little bit of red to make it more purpley, look. So white, cobalt blue and red, and a bit of cerulean blue. And then just add some white so it goes dark but not too dark. There we go. And we've got a perfect match. So I add a tiny bit of cerulean blue just to match her up. Try to get her as close to the pre-mix version. Some white. There we go. So now we've learned how to mix up that colour. So cerulean blue, cobalt blue, white, and a dot of red. And what we're going to do, we're going to add a tiny bit of these colours. This is raw sienna, which is brown and orange. So brown and orange if you haven't got it at home. And we're going to mix it into our blue. And it should turn it sort of a greeny grey. So raw sienna, we're going to mix into our blue. We're going to add a tiny bit of white. And we're going to test it out. And we're going to add a tiny bit of green, which is chromium oxide green. It's just a light green. So if you haven't got that green, you could add a little bit of yellow to sap green. So we're just going to make this sort of greeny grey. So we're going to test it out. I think that's still a tad too dark. What we're trying to do, we're going to make it a bit lighter. We're going to try to create perspective using colour. So by adding some more white to the mix, so it's more pastel, let's add a tiny bit more green. We're trying to create a far away clifftop. So I'm just going to add a little bit more raw sienna to make it more silvery. There we go. So by using pastel colours, we can push them back into the distance. So the reason we're using lots and lots of white is we don't want to have it really, really close. And by using harsh colours, what it does is it brings the mountains or the cliff tops towards the viewer. So by using this lighter sort of greeny grey, we can push this lovely cliff really far off into the distance. And because we've got the lighter colour at the horizon, it kind of looks like it's fading off into the distance. Can you see how that works? So all we're going to do, we're going to block her in with this colour. So don't be shy, get lots of paint. And don't worry if you go over your outline for your other mountains. We can neaten it all up in a minute. We just want to block her in with this base colour. And remember, acrylics always dry a tad darker. So always go lighter than you think. And then all we're going to do, we're just going to add some white and some yellow to our mix. A tiny bit of green. And we're just going to create a highlight colour. So we're using a little bit of dot of orange, dot of yellow. And what we're doing, oops, excuse the focus. Little dot of raw sienna, which is nice and warm. We're just adding some warm colours to some white, just to create a highlight. So these are all the areas of the cliff tops that are just getting a little bit of sunlight, just to create a bit of variation. It's really, really subtle. You can barely see it if you're watching along at home. But all it is by leaving little gaps in the darker paint that we've just blocked in, and then having a little bit of highlights around it, it just looks like texture on these cliff tops. So you've got some areas that are in the shade and some areas that are getting a bit of sunlight. But again, we want it so subtle that you barely notice it. Unless you come really close to the painting, you won't notice it. Now on the bottom here, there's a little bit of a highlight. So I'm just going to add a little bit more white and some yellow ochre, which you can make if you haven't got access to at home with yellow and purple. So yellow ochre is yellow with a bit of purple. And I'm just going to put a little bit of highlight where there's a little bit of a cliff top in the far distance. Again, I'm not really putting any detail. I'm just kind of just using these highlights just to imply detail. But I'm using a big chunky brush, so there's no actual real fine finesse or anything. So take your time. You can smudge it with your finger just to take away any harsh outlines. We want it really nice and soft. If I zoom in for you so you can see a bit better. So look, we've got these little highlights and we've got the darker colour in between to sort of look like grooves and terrain. And we're just going to get some of the colour we mixed up previously, that sort of cool blue, which was cerulean blue, cobalt blue, dot of red and some white. And we're going to add a little bit of purple just to make it a little bit cooler. And some white. Don't worry if your brush is dirty because it will kind of mix all together. So I'm adding a little dot. Excuse me, my brush keeps shredding. I bought some new brushes today and it keeps all the bristles keep shredding. And I'm going to add a dot of brown just to take a little bit of the colour, just a dot, literally a pinprick. And all I'm going to do, look, I'm just with that cooler bluey purple, I'm just going to emphasise those shadows just here. So I'm almost just creating little divots, little lines. And all it is a bit of the sky colour shining down, creating some shadows and grooves in the cliffs. So nothing complicated. As I say, if I wasn't zoomed in, you could barely notice it. Just on this outer edge, just to make it nice and cool and match the sky. But the great thing about learning this techniques is you can apply this to all your paintings at home. So if you're ever doing things that have trees or buildings or cliffs or anything like that in the distance, you can use these colour mixes and apply them to those trees and buildings and whatever. And you could use these to make your work look much more realistic. So it's a good thing to note down the painting recipes and the colours, and you can use these in the future. So let's just have some shadow over here. So just trying to make some texture. But as I say, don't worry if you go over your outlines or anything like that. We'll neaten everything up. Right, so that's our first mountain all done. So now we're going to work on the second one. So we're going to make it naturally darker to push that far one off more into the distance. And we're going to keep sort of the same colours. We're just going to make them a tad darker to bring them forward and create perspective. So let's just add some more cobalt blue to the mix because that will make it darker. So it's the same sort of colours. Let's add a tiny bit of brown. So cobalt blue and a little bit of brown. So I'm using raw umber brown because it's more earthy. And that should create, look, a nice sort of purpley grey. And we'll try her out. We'll see if it's too dark. I think that's a tad too dark. Simply because, as I say, we want to make the last one very dark. So let's just add a little bit of white. So the great thing about acrylics, look, you can just add a little bit of white and paint over it. So always test out your paint first. And as I say, acrylics always dry a shade darker. So it's better to go lighter than to go too dark. And what this middle colour should do is sort of be like an in-between colour. Where we're not too light, that we're not pushed back really, really far into the distance. And we're not too dark, that we're bringing it really close to the viewer. We're sort of in between. So let's block in, this could be some, look at this, just non-stop shredding. Let's have some rocks here in the background. And we can leave some gaps at the top, and we can add some highlights because there could be areas where the sun is sort of shining down just to give it a bit of interest so it's not so boring. So again, let's just block her in and then we'll figure everything out. So let's have some rocks sort of protruding out from the ocean. So as I say, don't worry if it's scruffy, we've still got paint in the ocean so we can neaten it all up. So there we go. So we got this one that's, look, it's coming nearer just simply because it's darker. So let's add some highlights onto it. So let's kind of mix the same sort of colours as we had before. Let's add some yellow to make it nice and warm. And some raw sienna. So let's get some of that raw sienna. So adding raw sienna and yellow together is kind of making sort of a brick colour. Sort of like a colour of sort of sand, I guess. So we're going to create a really bright highlight just on the outer edges of these rocks. So these are the areas of the rocks that are getting lots of sunlight. And as I say, we'll neaten it up in a minute. We just kind of want to imply areas that are getting some sunlight. You can sort of look, if you use a fine liner and you can kind of just make sort of little diagonal lines and things, and that just looks like rocks and boulders. Let's just add a little bit more raw sienna to turn it more like a brick colour. To turn it more warm and beige. Let's add a tiny bit of purple, just to suck a bit of the colour out so it's not too bright. We still want it quite cool because it's far off into the distance. So by using cobalt blues and purples, we can make it sort of muted and make it look far off. So the secret is you don't want to have really bright colours and you don't want to have really dark colours for things in the background. So by muting them and making them look more pastel and making them look not as harsh and dark, it pushes them into the distance, you see. And we're just going to use this colour just between the highlights and the dark colour as sort of a bridge tone, so there's not so much of a jump between bright yellows and this really dark, cool purpley blues. So let's get some on our brush. Let's add a little bit of green. Let's have some bushies. I'm just going to mix it into the darker colour. Let's just imply sort of treetops and bushes. Again, look, I'm just leaving gaps in between so the dark colour can shine through. So it looks like shadows in between these sort of cliff tops. I think it's a bit too light. It's almost as light as the colour behind it, the cliff top behind it. So let's make it a little bit darker. So it's back to the palette. Let's get some cobalt blue and some brown to make that colour again. So cobalt blue, brown and white to make the background colour. So a little bit of purple just to make it a bit cooler. I think I've made it a shade too light, but we'll try it. Yeah, it's a bit light. Let's use the darker one. If you don't match it 100%, don't worry. Look, you can just always go around it. So I'm just using this colour, look, just to sort of bridge the areas together and just add the illusion of texture. But if you've noticed with a lot of the tutorials I'm trying to teach you, it's the colours. There's not much detail in the paintings because all these paintings, they're designed for sort of beginners, intermediate painters. It's all about the colours and the brush techniques. All these little tricks I'm trying to teach you. And then as I keep saying to you, keep emphasising, once you get better at drawing and realism and thinking about how to plan a painting, that will come naturally over time. It's like any skill. You start doing it automatically. As you start making your outlines and things much more realistic, your work, because you've got all these base teachings. So let's get some green and raw sienna and just a bit brighter shade. Yeah, because you've got these core teachings, you can make your work super realistic with not much hassle and not much detail. So look, I'm just adding a little bit colour to these highlights to bring it forward. So as I was saying just previously, by adding a little bit more colour and adding a bit darker shade, it just brings this clip top forward. Now I'm just stepping away and just having a look, but I think it's a bit too bright, so let's just add a little bit of blue just to push it back again, and a little bit of white. So a lot of this is just experimentation. As I say, you don't normally do things always perfect at the first time, but acrylics are so forgiving. Look, we can just paint over it. Worst comes to worst, if it wasn't taking, we can just dry it with a hairdryer and just repaint over the top. But it's the same principle. Look, we're leaving little gaps and we're letting that dark blue shine through in between to create texture. And we're just trying to bridge the areas between the highlighted rocks and this area. There we go. That looks kind of realistic, doesn't it? As soon as we put the laugh cliff in, it will all come to life. It's like magic. You watch. So I'm just smoothing areas out. As I say, I just want the transitions to be really, really subtle. I don't want any really big jumps in colour because it's so far away. So now we're going to do, we've done this cliff, this one's getting nearer. We're going to do these bad boys and bring them really, really close using our darkest darks. Now we don't want to use black because black makes things cartoony. We're going to use cobalt blue and we're going to use raw umber brown. And this will create a really dark shadow colour. Look at that. And it's not black. It's kind of a really, really dark blue. Because it's got brown in it, it turns it quite grey. So we're just going to add a tiny bit of white because we don't want it really, really dark. We should get this lovely sort of grey blue. We're going to add a little bit of burnt sienna, which again is just orange and brown. So burnt sienna. To make raw sienna, you can add a little bit of yellow. And look, we're going to start blocking in our nearest cliff. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to add a little bit of texture and I'm going to leave gaps in the canvas where we're going to add some highlights and some shadows. But I'm going to use this colour to really emphasize harsh shadows. So we're using a harsh color to create harsh shadows, and that will trick your eyes at home and it will make it look like it's much nearer toward you, and hence the lesson will create perspective and depth. So I'm just adding all these like rough areas on the cliff top. And if you imagine this cliff has kind of got its back to the sun. So it's kind of in the shade here. So this area, especially in the corner, will be almost silhouetted and be really, really dark. So we can do the sort of fine detail and then we can start blocking this in and start just covering all this area up. Make a nice big dark shadow. So let's get loads of paint and just block her in. But can you see already, just by adding this tone, how it's bringing it closer and pushing the other two cliffs back? Just colour. So as I say, you don't have to be the best painter in the world. You don't have to be the best drawer. It's learning about how to use the colours. So let's make this nice and dark. And that will frame our corners. And then that will make the viewer look straight down the middle. And the good thing is we've got a big rock in the middle that we're going to paint in a minute. So that will kind of give the viewer something to stare at. So let's just have some crevices coming down here just to tie these two areas together. Why not? Let's have a big shadow here. As I say, we can neaten all this up in a minute. We just want to kind of gauge the colours correctly. We can even have a little bit where the second mountain and this mountain is kind of joining up to bring the two together. Let's just block in the rocks first. As I say, this will give the viewer something to stare at. So I tend to have things in the middle of the painting, and then that gives you, it's kind of like you're standing on this cliff top and you're looking out to sea. So I like to have things in the middle of the painting that people's eyes can focus on. So it's another trick with landscapes. If you try to have something in the middle. So let's have a really big rock here for harsh shadow. There we go. And I'll teach you in a minute how to do things like waves and shadows on the water. Let's just have some boulders and rocks here in the shore. Why not? Just to make it more interesting. Let's have one in between, just sort of here. And just a little bit linking these two areas together. So I don't want to make them too harsh, because look, it will bring the mountains back. So all I'm doing, I'm just using my finger. I'm putting the paint down, but I'm just using my finger to smudge it to make it less harsh. So let's bring this cliff top a little bit nearer. This could be the edge of a cliff. And as I say, look, it instantly brings it forward. So by smudging it, look, I can make it a little bit softer. I don't want it too harsh. I want it pushed back. So there we go. Okay, so I'm happy with the outline colour. So let's put some highlights on her. So we're going to get some burnt sienna and white to create sort of a brick tone. As I say, don't worry if your brush is dirty. We just want to kind of make a sort of muted tone. I'm just going to a tiny bit of green, just to make a nice sort of warm, sort of hot beige. And then just here, we're just going to have sort of cross between bits of stone and grass, sort of on the verge of the cliff. So again, these are all warm areas that are sort of catching the sun. So let's just have in between. And what we're doing, we're just going around our dark outlines. Again, don't worry if you paint over them. We can always mix some more paint and put them back in. So this top bit here is kind of getting a bit of heat, but as it goes down, it's going to be more in the shade. So let's add some purple to make it cooler. So do you remember I was saying cool tones are things like purple and blue? So by adding purple to the mix, we can sort of mute it even more and make it more look like it's in the shade. So down here at the bottom of all these stones is kind of in the shade. So by adding purple, look, it's more grey and more cold. We can paint the bottom of these cliffs. So again, just knowing that cooler tones such as purple and blue cool things down and make them look like they're in the shade. And warmer colours such as yellows, oranges, reds and pinks warm things up and they look like they're in the sunlight. So all this bottom area, nice and cool in the shade. So let's just block this bit here. And this corner here is getting hardly any sun. We can even use this colour. Look, we can just have some texture coming into the shadow when my hand gets out of the way. Just bringing it down, just looks like it's fading off. Look, by just using a little bit of paint, not much, and then using my finger to smudge it, we can make these sort of wispy bits of rocks that are getting a tiny bit of sunlight, just a tiny bit, again, just to add some texture. So here we're going to have a little bit of sunlight. So the sun's sort of beckoning down onto this. So let's use some warmer colours. So the opposite. So white and orange to create sort of a pastel orange. So a little bit of yellow for some heat. Excuse me. And let's just add a warmer tone. So look, the combination, look, we've got this combination of warm areas of the cliff and the cooler area at the bottom. It just looks like an area's in the sunlight and an area's in the shade. And it's, again, no detail, just knowing what colours are warm, what colours are cool. So as I keep saying, take all these lessons, apply them to your own art, make your own art fantastic. I love the fact that you all like and enjoy the tutorials and you find them really, really helpful. But I want you to go away and apply them to your own inspiration and your own artwork and use them to make your art unique for you, you see. That's the whole point of being an artist. So I'm just blending two areas together, so there's not much of a jump. Look at that. So let's just have a little bit of warm highlights just here, just where the sun's shining down. That looks really nice and natural. And let's get some green. As I say, don't worry if your brush is all sort of mixing together. Let's get some purple to mute it, and some cobalt blue. So we'll make a greeny grey. Let's just put some grass just here on the verge. So it's really weird, you get lots of little wild grass on cliffs, don't you? So let's just block this area in so there's no white canvas showing. So now she's all blocked in, it kind of looks a bit bland. So we'll put a little bit here, just coming down. And what we're going to do, we're going to clean our brush. So I'm just dipping my brush in some water. Hang on a minute, I'll just quickly do this bit here. Just a little bit of the middle colour, the sort of warm colour we mixed. So clean my brush, and let's get some green. And let's mix it into that dark shadow colour that we mixed. So all we're doing is using the shadow colour that we did the outline from, and just adding a tiny bit of green to make a harsh green. And we're just going to put some shadows here. So these are all the bits of grass that aren't getting any sunlight. So we're just going to make it a little bit darker, just to tie the areas together. So again, it's the same principle. We're just using a green, but adding this dark purpley blue to make it look like it's in the shade. Just link these areas together. There we go, perfect. So look, now we've got this really, really nice dark cliff, and we've brought it all towards itself. It's really pushing back the other two. So we can swap to a fine liner, and we can get our dark colour that we used to block it in, which was cobalt blue, brown and some white. And the really good thing is look, if your work is a bit scruffy, this is just a very quick tutorial, but say you were going photorealistic, you can always use a fine liner and put in every little blemish, every little crater and rock and boulder. It's up to you. So what I'm saying to you, now you know these colour combinations, you can take your own photos, you can find reference photos, and you can apply it to your own work. So again, by using the correct brushes, so I'm using a really, really thin fine liner, it's so much easier, look, to put little dots and finesse and sharp lines in these cliffs. And any bits of white canvas that's showing up, I can go over. I'm not going to go too detailed because, as I say, I just want it to be a quick tutorial. But if you're painting along at home and you want to make it super realistic, it's up to you. It's your painting. So don't forget, if you're watching at home, to like and subscribe if you're finding these tutorials useful and helpful. Please like the videos because it really, really helps them get promoted. And if you have any ideas for lessons, things that you want to learn, put them in the comments below. You can tag me at mstewartpaintings with your version of the tutorials. It's fantastic for me to get to know fellow artists. And some of the paintings that people send me are absolutely amazing and brilliant. And they're so cool. And it's great for me to see them and see people from all around the world doing the tutorials. So thank you so much if you have done. I tend to shout them out on my Facebook and Instagram, on my stories. So it's great because hopefully it'll get you some followers as well by getting you shouted out. So just neatening up areas with this fine liner. So as I say, don't ever worry when you're painting with acrylics, because if you make a mistake, you can always dry it and paint over it. So when we block in the ocean, if anything sort of gets covered up or anything, we can sort of neaten it up. I'm just going to get some of that highlight colour, and just where there's a bit of canvas showing, I'm just going to try and go over it a little bit. So as I say, look, there's nothing you can't fix. As in life, you can always go back and try to change things. So just put some highlights on this rock. These bad boys here. Just really subtle. Just to give them some texture. Okay, so that's looking nice and realistic. Let's just tie these two areas because that yellow is a bit harsh. Let's just use this nice sort of rock colour just to sort of tie it together. Could have some rocks in the distance that are just shining through the trees, why not? Just bits of the cliff that are getting a tiny bit of sunlight. See, I always go to do a really easy tutorial and then I always fiddle about with it. So look, push back, middle, darker. So that's really, really realistic now. So look, the more we zoom in, the more realistic it looks. So I've dried my painting, so please dry your painting and measure a straight horizon with a tape measure, and I always use chalk, but you can use a pencil. And I've put the tape on my horizon, and what we're going to do, we're going to start painting the ocean. So if you imagine the ocean is really far off into the distance, so we're going to get some cerulean blue and white. So cerulean blue and white. We're going to add a little bit of cobalt blue, kind of to make what we did with the top with the sky. So where we made the top colour here for the sky, we're going to kind of make a similar colour. Whoops, my white's all smearing. So let's get plenty of thick paint, and we're going to go right up to that tape. We're going to make sure our tape is fully positioned down so we don't get any smudges. And we're just going to go with our fine liner around these rocks. Again, don't worry if you clip them. You can always paint them back in. But it's important to go right up to the tape. Look, I'm going right up to the line because that will make me have a lovely straight horizon. But please always ensure that your painting is dry before you apply tape, because you don't want to take it off what you've just painted. So let's come down to just under these rocks. So let's block this corner in. There we go. So by having this darker blue, this sort of insinuates that this water is nice and deep off into the distance. And as we get more shallow and closer to the viewer, we're going to get lighter in colour. So we're going to use this colour, which is kind of electric blue, which is all it is cerulean blue and a tiny bit of turquoise. So you don't have to buy it. I'm just lazy. But all you need to do is just add a tiny bit of turquoise to your cerulean blue, and it just makes it more vibrant. And we're just going to add a little bit of white just to make it more pastel. So add a little bit of cerulean blue and a little bit of turquoise to your mix, and a tiny bit of white, and look, you should get a much more vibrant version. And all we're going to do, we're just going to create X shapes with our brush. Look, X shapes, and we're just going to blend it so you don't notice the change in colour. So we're just going to this nice vibrant blue as we come down and get more shallow. So we come into the beach. So let's go in here. Let's say, look, if you go over your cliffs or anything, don't worry, we can always paint them back in, neaten them up. So let's go around this little rock. And if I paint him, I'll cover him back in a minute. Let's come down. There we go. You can always paint the edges of your paintings, by the way, to make them look 3D if you don't want to frame them. So what I'm doing now, I'm going to add more turquoise and more white to imply more shallow water. So by adding, look, more turquoise and more white, it looks like the water is getting shallower. And again, look, we're just going to gently go back and forth and blend it so you don't notice the transitions. So look at that. You don't even notice it changing colour. So easy. Tricks the eye. So let's just make it a little bit lighter here into the sort of cove area. Just more shallow. And then down here. And then while I've got that colour, let's just blend it slightly. Look at that. Lovely transition. If I do say so myself. So let's get that colour. And let's create some waves. So let's do little scoops. So imagine little ramps, like little scoops. So what I'm doing, look, I'm just creating like a little scoops and illusion of texture. So these could be all crashing waves. Where it's going from the deeper water into all these rocks. So again, it's just using this really lovely turquoise. And if we remove our tape, dun, 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 we should have a perfectly straight line. Now you can always rub out if you've got any pencil or chalk. I like to use chalk so you don't get any marks. And then now we're going to use this darker blue that we mixed up, which was cerulean blue, cobalt blue, white, and a dot of red. So do you remember this top of the sky? And we're going to use that as a shadow. So if you imagine this cliff is really, really harsh, it's going to create a nice, dark, harsh shadow. So by using this cool blue on our ocean spray, it's going to imply that this area of all the water is in the shade. So look at that. Look how beautiful that looks. Lovely, cool blue. So let's have this area nice and in the shade. So again, just use a bigger brush. We'll just block her in. We can save a little bit there and we can use a finer brush just to go around these smaller rocks if we have to. Just trying to imply a harsh shadow here in the foreground. Again, by having darker colours, it will bring this area forward. So let's have a really big one here with this big rock. Look at that, that looks so cool. It's amazing how a painting comes to life right at the end. So don't give up. Keep persevering. It's not till the end till you find out how good it is. So let's get some yellow ochre and some white. So if you haven't got yellow ochre, add some purple to your yellow and lots of white to make it pastel. So purple, yellow and white. I'm going to add a little bit more purple myself just to make it a little bit more grayer. But I really, really want to emphasize the white. So this is just bits of the sea wash that is getting some sunlight. So it's got a hint of yellow into it. Now I think that's too yellow. We can go over it. It's a bit too golden, isn't it? But we'll lay it down. We can always change it. So let's add a little bit more white. Actually, let's add a little bit more purple just to make it grayer. So look, the more you add purples and blues, the more it turns grey. And the more you add yellows, oranges and things, the more it turns warm and hot. So let's just make it, there we go, a little bit more sort of lilac-y. And we'll mix these areas together. So it looks like some heat and some shade. There we go. And let's just have some froth, some sea foam coming around these rocks with that colour. Just really, really soft. Just blending the areas together. So again, just like the cliffs, we're just blocking her in before we put the highlights over the top. And then let's get some of the lighter blue, which was just cerulean blue, cobalt blue, and lots of white that we used for the sky. Do you remember we used that at the horizon? And then let's just mix these areas together. So by just using a lighter shade of blue, just on the edges, we can take away the harshness of these shadows. So as it moves into another colour, it's just not as harsh. So again, just using my finger just to smudge it. And as I say, look, if your cliff's tops get a bit ropey, you can always paint it back in. Don't ever fret if you make a mistake. So let's just use this lighter blue just to tie these areas in together. You can create some wash. If you think all these waves are crashing in, they're all sort of creating nice cool shadows. So by using this light blue, we can create that. And again, we always want to darken our corners to frame the composition. So I think while this bit at the bottom is kind of drying, let's just work on this bit. Just tie everything together. So I kind of like that. I think that looks kind of cool. So let's move to just pure titanium white now. Let's put all the highlights on. So just where I've left white in the canvas, I'm just going to go over it with white paint. And I'm just going to try to make everything look a bit more professional and smooth. So the great thing about using just completely bright white paint is it absorbs some of the undercolor. So if your highlights kind of look a bit bland once they've dried, you can always go over it with a second coat of paint. But here, just while this area is kind of drying, we can sort of tie it together. We can sort of gradually mix it. So I'm just going to leave that area to dry. And I'm just going to use some of this white just to create sort of waves around these rocks. So it's so easy because we've left white gaps. We can just sort of fill them in with the paint really. It's like a colouring in book. So let's just have some white here. We can make these waves look a little bit more neater. Just here, I could neaten this area up. Let's just have some waves, just tying this area. So if I zoom in for you a little bit, let's use a fine liner. So I'm using a really thin brush and I'm just creating some wash and some spray around these rocks, just as the waves come crashing in. So again, just using pure titanium white to add these really nice highlights. So let's put one here and we'll put our boulder back in a minute. We can have some coming into sort of this cove here. So the great thing is you can use the whites to sort of tie areas together, create a sort of splash. And even here in the distance, if you wanted to, you can just put some more waves. you can have little caps of waves sort of rising as it comes towards the shore. And then let's just get a big thick bit of paint here and just have some highlights as this one crashes into the rocks. Look at that. Bang! Just here. So just by adding little dots, it just looks like wash. As I say, they're really, really subtle. And if your white, as I said, if it dries a bit flat and it's absorbing some of the colour underneath, just dry it with a hairdryer or let it air dry for 5 minutes. And then just go over with just pure white a second time, and that will really make your highlights pop and make them look a bit brighter. So I'm just going to blend this area together. I'm going to deliberately let the undercolour shine through, because I want this area kind of in the shade, just with a little bit of highlights. Just blend it really softly, just so it all comes together. And then last but not least, just where I've gone over areas when we've blocked in the ocean, I'm just going to put some of the rocks back in. So I'm just going back to our cobalt blue, brown and white, and I'm just going to put some of these rocks back in, just make them look a bit harsher, neater with my fine liner. So as I say, there's nothing you can't fix, there's nothing you can't redo. So let's have some here in the foreground just to make it more interesting. Just some here on the corner. I think she's looking pretty beautiful. And it's such an easy lesson, using the darks. And I think she's finished. So I can't sign her because she's still wet. But you've learned how to push back your horizon and have darkened corners to frame your composition. You've learned how to do 3 mountains with the lighter pastel shade to push it off into the distance, to use a medium shade to bring it even closer, and then in turn use a darker colour to bring the mountains into the foreground. You've learned how to do highlights, how to do shadows, so we've got areas that are in the sun and areas that are in the cool, how to paint rocks, and how to bring them forward or push them back, how to have a gradient in your ocean to create deep and shallow water, and then how to paint waves and cast shadows in them to make them look really realistic. So a really easy tutorial in just under an hour. You've learned how to paint this gorgeous seascape of crashing waves into a beach. My name's Murray. I hope you've enjoyed the tutorial. Please like and subscribe if you have done. We've got over 150 landscape painting tutorials here on the channel for you to binge and learn. And happy painting, everyone. Take care and have a lovely week ahead. See you soon. Bye.